era. He asked Senator McCarthy, have you no sense of decency? And I would ask you the same, Secretary Rubio. But you have shown through your words and your actions what the answer is. And I have to tell you directly and personally that I regret voting for you.
Before we dive into this hearing, I want you to lock in on what you just saw, because that moment right there is where the mask fully slips. When a top U.S. official, Marco Rubio, gets hit with a blunt, historic question from Chris Van Hollen, the same question that marked the collapse of McCarthyism, you can feel the tension snap. And his reaction? Defensive, irritated, caught off balance. This hearing was not a casual policy disagreement. It was a full-on confrontation over humanitarian abandonment, weaponized immigration policy, and the bending of U.S. foreign policy around the personal whims of figures like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and even authoritarian leaders abroad. And the stakes were spelled out brutally. Lives lost in Sudan, starving civilians in Gaza, a refugee system being twisted for political gain, students targeted for their speech, and court rulings defied. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly how Van Hollen built a 7-minute avalanche of evidence, and how Rubio struggled to steady himself once the floor shifted. Watch how the dynamic changes the moment he tries to answer. This isn't just a policy disagreement. This is someone under fire trying to hold on to control. Pay close attention to how Van Hollen sets the tone. Calm, steady, but absolutely relentless. Then watch how quickly Rubio slides from clipped sarcasm to full defensive scramble. The contrast is stunning, and it drives everything that follows.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you and I served together in Congress for 15 years. We didn't always agree, but I believe we shared some common values. A belief in defending democracy and human rights abroad, and honoring the Constitution at home. That's why I voted to confirm you. I believed you would stand up for those principles. You haven't. You've done the opposite. And you used to speak with conviction about the importance of foreign aid as a tool to advance American values and interests. Then you stood by while Elon Musk took a chainsaw to USAID and other assistance programs. That has left a staggering toll. Broken trust with countries, openings for China and other adversaries, and countless preventable deaths of children and others. Take Sudan, for example. The freezing of U.S. humanitarian assistance forced the closure of nearly 80% of the emergency food kitchens there. 2 million famine-affected people were left without access to food. People died because of those actions. Mothers, fathers, and children. Tons of emergency food that could have saved their lives was left rotting in warehouses because you and Elon Musk refused to let USAID do its job. Sudan is a country where, by the administration's own determination, a genocide is unfolding in Darfur. But here's where it goes from cruel to despicable. While cutting off food aid to Sudanese families living through an actual genocide, you're fast-tracking white South Africans for refugee status under a manufactured claim that they are the victims of genocide. You tried to block the admission of individuals who had already been approved to come here as refugees while making bogus claims to justify granting such status to Afrikaners. You've made a mockery of our country's refugee process, turning it into a system of global apartheid where political ideology and race, more than truth or need, matter. And while you've turned away from a genocide in Sudan and invented one in South Africa, you teamed up with President Trump to throw the Ukrainian people under the bus and have been played like a fiddle by Vladimir Putin. Of course, Donald Trump not only said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one, he also said he would end the war in Gaza on day one. And yet last week, you were all running around to Gulf states, giving away very sensitive American AI and chips technology, but doing nothing to end the war in Gaza and get the remaining hostages returned. You know that for 78 days, the Netanyahu government did not allow a scrap of food to enter Gaza to reach over 2 million civilians. 57 children have died from malnutrition so far, and more than 14,000 children are in imminent danger of dying of starvation. As Cindy McCain said last week, and I quote, Families in Gaza are starving while the food they need is sitting at the border. That is a gross violation of both U.S. and international law. What did you do? Nothing. Not once did you publicly call upon the Netanyahu government to end the blockade. Fortunately, other countries spoke out, and now we see a tiny trickle going in. Where have you focused your energy instead, Mr. Secretary? Well, your first trip as Secretary of State was to El Salvador, not to promote democracy, but to cozy up to President Bukele, who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. The result was a cash for collusion deal to deprive people living in America of their constitutional rights to due process. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, instructed you to facilitate the return to the United States of Abrego Garcia, who the administration admitted was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Your response? You've openly flouted judicial orders. When asked whether you have been in touch with El Salvador to return Abrego Garcia, you boasted, quote, "I would never tell you that. And you know who else I would never tell? A judge." Clearly, you don't care about the Fifth Amendment right to due process, and you don't care about the First Amendment either, since you've been very busy snatching students off of college campuses for exercising their right to free speech. You dredged up a relic from the McCarthy era to claim that student protesters posed a threat to the foreign policy of the United States. Give me a break, Mr. Secretary. You know as well as I do this isn't about national security, it's about punishing free speech. And you know that in America, the government doesn't get to use its power to punish speech it doesn't like. Yet in March, you boasted about revoking student visas, saying, and I'm quoting, "We do it every day. Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa," unquote. Let's look at one of those lunatics, Mr. Secretary, Ms. Ozturk. Her crime was co-authoring an op-ed in her college paper critical of Tufts University's response to the war in Gaza. Your own department found zero links to terrorism, no anti-Semitic statements, but you still yanked her visa and shipped her off to detention in Louisiana. And the list goes on and on. The federal judge in the case of Mohsen Madawi, who is the Columbia student who was ambushed by federal agents at his citizenship appointment, said, and I quote, this is the judge, "Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and Palmer raids. Like the McCarthy-era witch hunts of the 1950s, your campaign of fear and repression is eating away at foundational values of our democracy. Back then, it took one voice, Attorney Joseph Welch, to cut through the hysteria with the simple question that marked the beginning of the end of that shameful era. He asked Senator McCarthy, have you no sense of decency? And I would ask you the same, Secretary Rubio. But you have shown through your words and your actions what the answer is. And I have to tell you directly and personally that I regret.
Okay, let's break down what you just watched. Because that wasn't a speech. That was a demolition. From the start, Van Hollen deploys something that instantly shifts the power dynamic, shared history. He reminds Rubio they served together. He reminds him he once believed he stood for democratic values. And he uses that to frame everything that follows as a betrayal of those values, not a disagreement. A fall. Then he walks through the foreign aid cuts, and notice how he does it, not with bureaucratic language, but with consequences. He talks about kitchens closing, millions starving, children dying, food rotting in warehouses. He forces the human cost into the room and pins it directly to Rubio, and, by extension, Elon Musk, who he says took a chainsaw to U.S. aid programs. This isn't policy analysis. This is a prosecutor laying out a chain of events that leads to preventable deaths. And then he pivots to something even more explosive, race-based manipulation of the refugee system. He accuses Rubio of fast-tracking white South Africans while blocking approved refugees from Sudan amid a genocide. He doesn't merely imply bias, he spells out a global apartheid framework. That's an extraordinarily charged accusation, and he delivers it without raising his voice. The calmness makes the blow land harder. That's when you see Rubio's posture shift. He starts glancing, tightening his shoulders, breathing shorter. Watch his body language in the raw footage. His stillness is not composure. It's bracing. Then, Van Hollen hits him with the pivot to Vladimir Putin, accusing Rubio and Donald Trump of being played like a fiddle. Look at Rubio's face at that line. His eyes flicker downward. He does not like being characterized as someone else's pawn, especially not Putin's. But Van Hollen is just getting warmed up. He unloads accusation after accusation. Failure to push Israel to allow food into Gaza, cozying up to El Salvador's self-proclaimed coolest dictator. Openly defying a Supreme Court order, using visa revocations as political punishment, invoking McCarthy-era laws to crack down on peaceful. Student speech. This is a list meant to overwhelm, to suffocate any attempt at rebuttal. He even quotes judges, adds names, cases, outcomes. He's building a wall of evidence, each brick crushing the last shred of plausible deniability. Now here's the real turning point, when Van Hollen invokes Joseph Welch's famous question to McCarthy. That's not a casual reference. That's a nuclear comparison. It implies moral collapse, loss of integrity, and historical infamy. It's the kind of thing that gets replayed for years if it sticks. And Rubio's reaction confirms how deeply it lands. He tries to laugh it off, but the laugh is thin. He says Van Hollen's regret confirms I'm doing a good job, which isn't a rebuttal. It's a dodge meant to regain footing. But it doesn't work. In fact, it highlights how little he has to counter with. Then the chairman shuts Van Hollen down, and you can see Rubio seize the moment like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. He jumps in with, "Well, I'd like to respond," framing himself as the rational counterweight to the untrue accusations. But this is where things get messy. His tone gets sharper, faster, more defensive. He starts listing random examples of aid spending he dislikes, and you can feel the energy shift from strength to scrambling. The moment Van Hollen tries to interject, Rubio snaps. And that's crucial. It shows who is fighting to control the room and who has already lost control of the narrative. Rubio's irritation is obvious. His list of grievances becomes a spray of numbers and anecdotes instead of a coherent defense.
He said, because much of these are untrue, but I'll go through a few. First of all, I'm actually very proud of the work we've done with USAID. For example, I don't regret cutting $10 million for male circumcisions in Mozambique. I don't know how that makes us stronger and more prosperous as a nation. I don't regret psychosocial support services.
I raised Sudan, Mr. Secretary.
Can I respond,
Senator, I'd ask you to suspend. You had 7 straight minutes of
I chose to use my time that way, Mr. Chairman. That's my right to use my time that way.
Secretary Rubio.
Well, I can go on. I mean, there's other things here. We spent $227,000 for Big Cat's YouTube channel from USAID. We spent $14 million for social cohesion in Mali, whatever the hell that means. So I can go on and on. I got the list here, and there's more. I didn't even bring the whole list. In the case of El Salvador, absolutely. Absolutely. We deported gang members, including the one you had a margarita with. And that guy is a human trafficker, and that guy is a gangbanger, and the evidence is going to be clear. In the days to come, you're going to see who you went to defend.
Senator,
I'm sorry,
please,
Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Rubio has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, he can't make unsubstantiated comments like that.
Secretary Rubio has the floor. You had
Secretary
your time.
Rubio should take that testimony to the federal court of the United States because he hasn't done it under oath.
Here's another point, okay? There is a division in our government between the federal branch and the judicial branch. No judge in the judicial branch cannot tell me or the president how to conduct foreign policy. No judge can tell me how I have to outreach to a foreign partner or what I need to say to them. And if I do reach to that foreign partner and talk to them, I am under no obligation to share that with the judiciary branch. Just like a judge cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister of Russia, they cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister or the president of El Salvador. And if I did negotiate with them, which we have responded to them, and we've told them, we've had communications with the president of El Salvador. I am under no obligation, under our division of powers in this country, and to share with the judicial branch how I conducted diplomacy of the United States. It would actually be counterproductive. If I started sharing with courts, or frankly, with the media, my conversations with foreign leaders and all of their details, no foreign leader would talk to me again, and we would break trust with them. So I have complied with every court order. What I won't comply with is an order to disclose what I'm saying and what we're talking about with a foreign leader, because then they won't talk to me. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. About the student visas, let me say this. I don't deport anybody, and I don't snatch anybody. The State Department does not have officers in the street snatching everybody. What I do is revoke visas. And it's very simple. A visa is not a right. It is a privilege. People apply for student visas to come into the United States and study. And if you tell me that you're coming to the United States to lead campus crusades, to take over libraries and try to burn down buildings and acts of violence, we're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what Ms. Ostork did?
We're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what she did? Come
that,
on, Mr. Secretary.
and every single
You're
one of
just
these
blowing
cases, the
smoke
factors
here
are
now.
different.
Senator,
the bottom line is, if you're
Senator,
coming here to stir up trouble on our campuses, we will deny you a visa. And if you
Does
have
the
a
First
visa
Amendment
and we find
apply
you,
to
we'll
people
revoke
living
it.
in the United
And
States?
we're going to do more. There are more coming. We're going to continue to revoke the visas of people who are here as guests and are disrupting our higher education facilities. People are paying money. These kids pay money to go to school, and they have to walk through
Writing
a bunch
an
of
op-ed
lunatics
to the
who are
tough
here on student
newspapers
visas.
disrupting the
Simple
foreign
as
policy
that.
of the United
I want to
States?
do more. I hope we can
That's
find more of these people.
pathetic, Mr.
In fact,
Secretary.
the other day, some guys led a riot. I forgot what university it was, and I asked, please, can you find the arrest records of all the people that were...
Now let's unpack Rubio's response, because what he says here reveals far more than he intends. First, he tries to reframe the entire critique around bureaucratic examples, circumcision programs in Mozambique, YouTube channels, social cohesion funding. Notice what's missing. Any answer to the central allegation that aid cuts caused deaths in Sudan. He never touches it. Not once. That silence is louder than any rebuttal. Then things escalate when he says, essentially, that no judge can tell him how to conduct foreign policy, and that he has no obligation to disclose diplomatic communications even when a court orders transparency. That's not a legal explanation, that's a declaration of unilateral authority. And listen to his tone. He's not offering a constitutional argument, he's rationalizing defiance. This is where the loss of control becomes unmistakable. He tells the committee it would be counterproductive if courts or media knew his foreign conversations. He frames secrecy as a virtue, but the subtext is, I don't have to answer to anyone. That's exactly the kind of posture Van Hollen was describing when he invoked McCarthyism, a government actor who treats oversight as interference rather than accountability. Then we get to the student visa section, and this is where the mask slips completely. Rubio claims, I don't deport anybody. Technically true, but irrelevant to the accusation. The issue was visa revocations used as punishment for speech, and he avoids the core question, did he revoke a student's visa because she wrote an op-ed? Van Hollen presses him. Is that what she did? And Rubio will not answer. He just repeats that anyone who stirs up trouble will lose their visa, but he never defines trouble. This is key. That vagueness is intentional. It turns a legal standard into a political one. And when he says, we're going to do more, there are more coming, the threat becomes explicit. He's not hiding the punitive intent, he's bragging about it. Then he goes even further, boasting about asking for arrest records so he can match them with visa holders to revoke more visas. That's not national security. That's using immigration status as a weapon to police dissent. And his language gets uglier with each sentence. Pathetic. Lunatics. He's no longer explaining policy. He's venting at political opponents. Now look at the chairman. He eventually cuts him off. When even the chair says we've had enough, you know the exchange is spiraled. And this moment matters for a bigger reason. Rubio is no longer responding to Van Hollen's accusations. He is proving them. Van Hollen warned that Rubio was turning immigration policy into a tool for punishing speech. Rubio then describes, proudly, how he hunts for people to punish. Van Hollen argued that Rubio was defying court orders. Rubio then says openly that judges can't tell him how to conduct diplomacy. Van Hollen accused him of twisting refugee policy based on ideology. Rubio responds with ideological justifications for aid cuts and visa crackdowns. It's point-for-point confirmation, delivered in real time on the record. And this is why that opening teaser, the have you no sense of decency moment, hits with such force. Because by the end of Rubio's responses, the hearing has replayed the exact kind of abuse of power that Question was designed to confront decades ago. So, who came out with momentum? Van Hollen, by a mile. He controlled the tempo, the evidence, the framing. He launched a decisive, coherent case built entirely on observable actions and documented outcomes. Rubio came out defensive, reactive, flustered, and at times openly hostile. He drifted into tangents, generalized about threats that weren't in evidence, and made sweeping claims about his authority that veered into constitutional red zones. But here's the most telling part. At no point did Rubio address the core accusations about Sudan, Gaza, or refugees. Not once. That absence speaks louder than any list of aid programs he dislikes. When the stakes are human lives and democratic rights, dodging the central question is the answer. This hearing was a reminder of why congressional oversight exists. Because when officials stop answering to courts, to facts, or to basic democratic values, someone has to drag the truth back into the light. And Van Hollen did exactly that. Calmly, methodically, brutally. So if you felt the tension rise as you watched that second clip, that wasn't accidental. That was a powerful official being pressed past the edge of his talking points and realizing the room was no longer under his control. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?